Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us at the 2024 NC Baptist Annual Meeting. My name is Seth Brown, Director of Convention Relations for NC Baptist. It is really great to see so many NC Baptists from across the state gathered here in Greensboro to celebrate all the ways that God is using us on mission together. As we're here, all the exciting things that we will see and be a part of these 2 days, our hearts and prayers continue to be with all those who were impacted by the devastating effects of Hurricane Helene. In September, this storm brought unprecedented damage throughout the Southeast, but especially in Western North Carolina. Many NC Baptists who are here in attendance at this annual meeting have friends and family who have lost their homes, who have lost their businesses, and even lost their lives as a result of this storm. And we want you to know that your NC Baptist family loves you, we stand beside you, and we are continually looking for ways to serve you. Attendees here this year are going to learn about all kinds of ways that NC Baptist have boots on the ground in Western North Carolina, and many ways that churches can continue to be involved in serving those communities. So to that end, today I have joining me Baptist on Mission Executive Director Treasurer Richard Brunson and Disaster Response Coordinator Tom Beam. Welcome, guys. Thank you for being here. So first of all, we just want to say a heartfelt thank you to the Baptist on Mission team, the staff team, but also the disaster response coordinators that have been just serving night and day since this storm hit. So we want to say thank you for that. And, I want to talk about that. Let's get into the details of how you guys have been serving. So I want you to mentally rewind the tape back to before the storm and talk to us about the ways that Baptist on Mission prepares year-round for a crisis like this, and then talk us through the first days that you became aware that this storm was even approaching before it even got to us. Talk us through that.
Thank you, Seth. So, we're preparing year-round. We're making sure that our equipment is maintained, that it's ready to go at a moment's notice. And so our volunteers and our equipment, they are always ready to go as soon as we call. And for this storm in particular, we knew that it was going to hit Florida. We knew that it was going to come up toward Georgia. We had no idea that it was going to do the kind of damage. But just a few days before, when that eye started coming this way, there's a dirty side of every storm. They talk about the dirty side. And when that eye was coming up toward Tennessee, that put North Carolina mountains on the dirty side of that storm. And so we really, really started thinking through, okay, what churches are we going to call to set up locations? What of our equipment are we going to use? What size of kitchens are we going to need to prepare to bring in? And so those are the kinds of things that were going on probably 3 days before the storm as we were anticipating it coming up and really the dirty side of the storm hitting North Carolina.
Seth, we are blessed in North Carolina with all kinds of equipment. And, usually it's way more than what we're going to need. And a lot of times when there's a disaster like this, your other sister state disaster relief conventions respond to your state or you respond to their state. And there were so many kind of unique things about Helene, as Tom's already said. But one was all the other states were tied up in Florida, Georgia, South Carolina. It was just us. And so every bit of equipment we had that we thought we had so much of was put in use and is still in use. And it's just amazing. God has given us all that equipment and the volunteers, and it's all been needed, and probably more, but it's all been needed. And it's what a blessing that God gave us the equipment that we have.
So I know one of the ways that sort of equipment is provided is through the North Carolina Missions Offering. Tell us a little bit about that and what that means for the work that we do.
Well, all of our regular budget comes from the North Carolina Missions Offering. So when we have an event like a Helene, we'll set up a Helene disaster reserve. And every dollar, and thank you, North Carolina Baptist, churches are contributing to this because every dollar is going into this Helene reserve. And we're not going to spend any of it on salaries or administration. It'll go directly toward helping churches, helping with feeding, with recovery, with rebuilds, so that God's going to be glorified through everything that's done and has been done the last 6 weeks, but that's going to be done the next 6 years. And so it's just the missions offering is vital for us because of that.
So we hear you guys talk about often Baptist on Mission approach to disaster response kind of comes in 3 stages. There's relief, recovery, and then rebuilding. Talk us through that. Break that down for us.
So for us, disaster relief is just getting into a site, getting it ready, setting up mass feeding, and then the volunteers that have to support that. So your admin, logistics, maintenance, shower laundry volunteers, and all of that. The most important thing is having a location where we can set that up. And we've got a lot of churches, not just in Western North Carolina, but all across the state that are ready and willing for us to come and really invade them to set up these sites. And then we move into looking at the kind of damage. And so that homeowner that needs a roof tarp or a tree taken off their house, or the flood has flooded their basement or their main floor of their house. And so our volunteers are doing that. So we start with making sure we take care of initial needs. And then as we move forward, it very quickly turns into a rebuild kind of thing.
So usually we kind of think about the relief phase is like the first 1 to 3 weeks, and then the recovery it starts pretty soon, but there's overlap between these phases. But the recovery goes on after, we're still doing mud outs, tear outs, chainsaw jobs, after we've finished kind of the feeding a lot of times. And then we move in, so it's 1 to 3 weeks, 1 to 3 months, and then maybe 1 to 3 years on a big disaster where we're going to do rebuild. Well, Helene it affected so many people. It was so massive, unprecedented. We're looking at 1 to 6, well, it's almost been 6 weeks. We're still doing feeding because so many areas in North Carolina are without power. So, but think 1 to 6 weeks, 1 to 6 months in the recovery, the chainsaws, the mud outs, because there's so many homes that were affected, like 120,000 homes were affected. And then the rebuild, we think is going to be 4 or 5, maybe 6 years that we're going to need volunteers, we're going to need churches investing, being Jesus' hands and feet to hurting people in Western North Carolina.
So you may have touched on this a little bit already. What stage would you say that we're at right now in Western North Carolina?
Well, they're still all 3 overlapping because we've started the rebuild, but we're moving more. Real soon we're going to be in the rebuild, and within the rebuild we've kind of divided that out, and we have something that we're going to talk about. You're going to hear more about today and tomorrow that we're calling essential rapid repairs, and that's because there's so many people who don't have a home that they can go back to. It's been flooded. They don't have electricity. They don't have insulation. It's been torn out. Their house has been mudded out. And for some of them, they're getting hotel vouchers, but it might be 60 miles away, and they're not going to do that. They've got jobs. They're sleeping in cars in some cases, or they're with their families, with a neighbor or a relative's family. And the goal of Essential Rapid Rebuild, ERR, is to help get a family as quickly as possible back into their home, and their home is safe, sanitary, and functional. It's not finished, but it's functional. It's got insulation, it's got floor, it's got a hot water heater, it's got a stove, it's got a refrigerator, it's got plywood floor. It's not a finished floor, but there's insulation in the walls and sheetrock, and they can live in that home as a family. We'll have HVAC units. We're using the mini splits, so they'll have a warm home through the winter. So we're right in the middle of starting that. We did the first pilot. We were able to do that house in a week. And so now we're starting pilots in different parts of the state to get people caught up on what we need to do. But we're going to need licensed plumbers and electricians. We're going to need a lot of helpers who just want to love the people who were affected and the homeowners and their families.
So say more about that. If there are churches here who maybe want to get involved, what are the next steps for Baptist on Mission, and how might they look at those opportunities?
We have on our website, baptistonmission.org, there is a Volunteer Now button, And you can click on that, and we're still doing recovery also. So there are 2 buttons. You can sign up to go do recovery, or you can sign up for rebuild. And that rebuild right now is the ERR. But after we finish the ERR, we're going to be coming back to those homes to try to finish those homes. The other key thing that we're working on, that we're at about, is it 14 different, were we at 14 or 16 locations, Tom?
We had 16 locations, 13 recovery, and 3 massive feeding to start with, and we're at 9 recovery and 1 mass feeding site still.
So we're still at 10 locations, and all those are churches. Well, when you're talking about long term, that's a lot of stress on a church, and a lot of, we're going to wear out our welcome, even though we got great churches. And so we're looking at finding some rebuild centers where we can kind of consolidate even more and house and feed 200 volunteers at a time at each of the rebuild centers. We're hoping to have 4 of those rebuild centers spread out where they can be kind of a hub and a spoke to get to the places where people need the help the most.
Yeah. So you guys have just spent untold hours out on the field helping churches. You've seen a lot. You've heard a lot. I would love to hear from you some ways that you have seen churches being on mission together. Where have you seen those examples of that on mission together spirit? And I want to ask it in 2 different ways. First of all, let's start with the churches and communities in Western North Carolina. How have you seen them on mission together?
So first of all, the churches in the community, they've all come together there's churches that were damaged, and churches in that community and volunteers have come in and helped those churches start the rebuild process. So that's been great. Churches have called, numerous churches have called and said, we know that you're at such and such church, but if you wear them out, we'll let you come, so they're jumping in to say, we'll help you. We will help house volunteers if you need us. We've had volunteers, our volunteers, that their homes were damaged. Some of them, their homes were destroyed, and they're living out of their motorhome, and they're traveling around assessing homes and helping people, even though they don't have a home to go back to. So those are the kinds of things we're seeing from people that live up there and worship up there in Western North Carolina.
The other thing, Seth, we know of, it's at least 60 Baptist churches that were distribution centers in their communities. And so we've had churches, pastors, associational AMSs who've just put in untold hours of faithful service, loving people in their community. And that's been amazing to see. Something that's interesting about, for me always, Western North Carolina people, our best volunteers. So Tom, when he's talking about this couple, and we're going to show a video about them tomorrow in the presentation, they exemplify our best volunteers because of I think it's the mountain spirit, that great, neighbor helping neighbor. And here they are, even though they've been affected, some of them personally affected, they're out helping other people. It's amazing.
One more thing, the storm was still in North Carolina, and we knew that we were going to set up a feeding operation in the Buncombe County area. And we'd already worked out in Arden at Biltmore Baptist. And we had volunteers leave their home in Region 10. It was raining. They didn't know they had no power. And they left in the rain and drove to Buncombe County in anticipation of running that feeding site. And then they did that for 10 days. Checked on their home, it was okay, but those volunteers, they just want to serve, and they'll serve no matter what. And that's really the kind of spirit that you saw for people all over Western North Carolina.
Amen. Well, as we wrap up here, just another minute or 2, let's now turn to churches from other parts of the state that weren't, as affected by the storm. How have they been on mission together?
Well, the sign-up sheet I was talking about on our website, we were, especially early on, the first 2 or 3 weeks, we were just overwhelmed. So many people wanted to go and help, and it was amazing. And with all the phone calls, the way that people have collected things, the way they've been praying and giving and going. We've been doing disaster relief for 40 years, but this is the most This is the hurricane that's been the disaster that's been the biggest, and it's been the one that we've had the most support from our churches by far. It's just been amazing how North Carolina Baptists have been on mission together, and they care about people who are hurting.
Amen. Well, brothers, I want to say to you, from me personally, and I know I speak on behalf of so many, number one, thank you for your leadership during this time. Seriously, thank you for how you have served and how you have led in this state. And thank you for being here to talk to us today. Listeners, whether you're here in person or you're listening online, if you want to find out more about how you can pray, give, and go in response to Hurricane Helene, you can go to ncbaptist.org/Helene. From there, you'll get connected to all kinds of resources, prayer prompts, and ways that you can get engaged. Thank you for listening today. God bless.